Hello, my name is Daniel Adibi, and I'm your host for Our World 101, the show in which we discuss complicated, real world events and issues to bridge people together. Recently, we witnessed the devastating attacks led by Hamas, a terrorist organization located in the Gaza Strip, against Israel on October 7th. In the attacks, 1,200 Israelis died, and 253 Israelis and foreigners were taken hostage by Hamas. For many Jewish people around the world, this attack served as a reminder of the atrocities faced during the Holocaust. Hamas claimed that the attacks were a result of the continued expansion of Israeli settlements, threats of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the suffering of the Palestinian people. In response, Israel declared a state of war and announced a ground invasion of Gaza. Probably the most horrifying aspect of the whole conflict is the civilian casualties and the fear instilled on both sides of this conflict. Millions of civilians are caught in the middle of this centuries-old conflict between Israel and Palestine, and with the conflict continuing to worsen and the fighting seeming to never end, a solution for peace seems unattainable. However, beyond just those directly involved, this conflict has a worldwide impact, as it has led to an increase in hate and hostility, as well as an increase in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Today, we have two New Jersey Teaneck High School students, Liora Pelavin and Rawda Elbatrawish, talking to us today about an incentive that they have taken to combat this increase in hatred. They are both good friends. Rawda is Muslim and Liora is Jewish. And after recognizing the division in their community resulting from these increased attacks, they decided to create events that would foster a safe space for discussion about the ongoing conflict. So Rawda and Liora, I'm really excited to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for coming. As my first question, I just wanted to ask both of you if you can each tell our viewers a little bit about yourselves and how your upbringing or background has influenced you and shaped you into who you are today.
So I'm a sophomore in high school. And we sort of started this, it just happened all through Instagram, but sort of what motivated me to do it is that my mom is actually a rabbi, and my dad is a doctor. And as a family, we've always been people who talk about social issues at the table, at the dinner table. It is not something we shy away from. So they've always taught me to fight for justice. We've gone to many protests. My mom has a saying, a family that protests together stays together. And so they've just instilled this Jewish value of justice and fighting for justice and learning and peace. So that's really what motivated me to do that. I'm part of many climate organizations, but this is something new that I've been doing because I really believe that things on a local level can make a national impact. And I've done a lot more national things, but I think taking time to be back with my community has really made a big impact.
Good. How about you?
Okay, so I'm a senior and I've always honestly been super involved in politics and getting in, speaking for the silenced or speaking for those who don't really have a voice. I originally posted it on my Instagram, who would be willing to help me with an educational event. I was going to originally do a protest, but, it just kind of progressed into being an event for all, just to kind of educate others and bring everyone together through that. What really motivated me to keep going with it rather than start it was a Board of Education meeting I'd spoken at. Just speaking at that meeting, the tension in that room was insane. And just speaking there brought targets on my back. I had to be escorted by security. And that was just insane to me. It shouldn't have to ever get to that point. So that was really the motivating factor that kept me going into doing this event.
Yeah, and obviously these events have definitely gotten a lot of, attention. They've really been very successful. I'm wondering, when you were originally planning these events, you're kind of in the planning phase of it. Did you expect your events to be this big of a deal? And kind of what was your original goal with the events?
Okay, so when we were doing this, when I was the flyer I made literally in my gym class, that's how small of an event I was expecting it to be. When I first made it, I was telling Liora, maybe we need one box of pizza because we serve food there. And maybe 10 people will show up. If we're lucky, maybe 15. So it was really surprising and shocking when we had a wait list to our event and people from upstate New York were showing up to it. So it's just it was not expected to get this big at all. It was 10, 15 people max that were expected to be there.
Yeah. And can you also tell us why, in particular, your town of Teaneck, why was that such a good place for these types of discussions?
Um, Teaneck historically has had many different communities. It's a very diverse town, but when you look at the town itself, it's very segregated into those communities. So you have very like Jewish areas and very Muslim areas. And so they've come together many times. We do a lot of events like this between races, religions, but we knew that like at this point there had been protests where they weren't against an institution, they were against each other. And at that point, we knew that there was a need to have these conversations because it's an historically Jewish town, a historically Muslim town, a historically Black town. We needed to bring the conversations where it was needed. This was not to change what was happening in Israel, Palestine, but to make people see each other. They were saying things about each other, about people they barely even met, yet they're neighbors. So it was important that we helped people see eye to eye. They might never agree, but the fact that they can just talk to each other was really important to us.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, I know that you often emphasize that you aren't there to change people's opinions about the conflict, but rather to change their view on other people's opinions. Can you just elaborate on what exactly that means?
So with the events, obviously we all have like our pretty strong opinions on this. Like I know Liora and I, we agree with the majority, but we do have some parts that we disagree with. And that was kind of what the event was like based off of. It's not like we're expecting to change someone's view on what's happening because respectfully, the way I feel for my opinion is the same exact way like someone else feels for theirs. So the whole point of it was to kind of give a sense of understanding towards others. Because even though like you might not understand someone else's opinion, you might not understand why they agree with some stuff, it's important to kind of see them as a person, like I see them for the person that they are rather than for the opinion they hold. And I feel like that kind of opens up many doors of like understanding and compassion towards others. And I feel like for me, it's more personal because the day I gave that speech at a Board of Ed meeting, I had like targets on my back because they were just mixing up everything I said and just took it in their own to their own interpretation. And so that's why I think it's really important not to agree with the majority. Like you don't have to agree with every single thing a person says, but to find common ground within that disagreement.
Yeah. And how has your community, so adults in your life, classmates, teachers, how have they responded to the events that you're holding? Have they told you anything like that?
At first, it was a lot of like teachers like helping us get people to come there. But we've had actually very mixed responses. Some people said this was a horrible idea, this was going to be unsafe. Many people were very into it. So we had two events. One of them was just for teens, and the second one was teens and adults. And the first one, there were people who were like, yes, this is great for teens. But then when we opened it to adults, thought it was horrible. And it turned out both events stayed peaceful the entire time. So we've had a lot of people been proud of us. But we've gotten a lot of hate as well because people are saying we don't speak for our communities. We've never claimed to speak for our communities. That's something we want to emphasize. We're just speaking for ourselves and we're speaking for how we see our community right now. So we've gotten very mixed responses, but our families and friends have been very supportive.
Yeah, and I remember I was looking at some other interviews that you guys were in. I remember that you mentioned that you'd sometimes get like negative social media comments. How would you respond to those?
So at first we were like, we would be reading them and look within we eat each other. We'd be like, oh my God, like how could they say this? But now it's like whatever, like, you know, they got to say what they got to say. It's none of our business. So the way we respond to it is by not responding. I feel like that's more effective because once you like give them that platform where you kind of emphasize the hate rather than the millions of good comments that you got, I think it like kind of shifts the purpose of finding common ground. So I think, yeah, like we focused more on the good of this events because like even like people who disagreed with it in the beginning and were telling us this is like horrible and they were trying to shut it down are the same exact people who came to me after and were like, thank you for doing this. Like, you know, it opened my eyes, you know, it was a different perspective. So I think it's like important to just keep going with the right intentions and the right reasons. And the hate is just always going to be there regardless.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with you know, such a like debated conflict and such a conflict with really deep roots that people feel very passionate about. And speaking of just, how divided people are over this conflict, I know that during your meetings, you have like certain policies, like you make the attendees sign a contract that says something like no shouting. And obviously I understand that people feel very passionately about this. They're very divided. So it's easy for conversations to get very like heated. So I was just wondering if that ever happened in your meetings, if you ever did have discussions that you had to moderate because they were getting too heated or too rowdy, and what else was kind of in that contract?
So within our like within our two events, there were definitely arguments and conversations that got heated, but never that got to the point of yelling. So sometimes people would be like, we would try to like push them to agreeing, and I definitely talked with people that said it after that they felt really emotionally uncomfortable. But that's what we wanted people to feel. The thing we wanted to make sure is that no one felt physically uncomfortable and physically unsafe. Because when you're in a moment like that, you're not going to want to talk about things you agree about. All you're going to want to do is you're just going to project, you want to be like, you're not going to have a meaningful and productive conversation. Other things that were in our contract were things like no hate towards one's identity. We wanted to emphasize that you're not here to talk about your experiences, really. You're not really here to talk about other people's identity. You're here to talk about the world overall and what's happening in Israel, Palestine. And some of the other things were like basically no recording. We didn't want anyone to feel like that what they were going to say was going to go on record. So that's why we had no press inside. The only times we had press were photographers, but they weren't recording anything that was said. And overall, it was just like, there were some things that were more concrete and some things like learn to feel uncomfortable, lean in to feeling uncomfortable because you are going to feel uncomfortable, and trying to like box yourself up isn't going to work. So it was a mix between pretty concrete rules and some ones that were leaning into having the conversation and making it more productive.
Yeah. Something else I was wondering was how you structured your conversations. So was it kind of in a format where everybody would you just say something to start off and everybody just kind of have a discussion about it? Like, how did it play out?
We didn't give any of the educational pieces ourselves. Like we really were just the MCs of the event. We had no say in like what's being said to others because we didn't want to put any bias into it. For the educational piece, we started off with like kind of a presentation to give everyone a like basic foundation, this foundation everyone needs of what's like the history of what's happening. Like for example, we talked about the Nakba and then we talked about the Holocaust. And so we had a Rutgers professor who gave that. She specializes in these studies and she's been teaching it for a while. And then we had everyone sitting in like discussion groups. There were groups of like 8 or 7. After the professor gave her a piece, we would like kind of break out and we'd ask them a question and they would have to discuss it amongst themselves. After they discussed it and like we had a couple questions, after they discussed all those questions, we'd come back for a share back in the end where they share one thing the entire table agrees on.
Mm-hmm. And was there any one particular conversation or comment at some of those events that like particularly resonated with you?
I
There
think
was honestly a couple, like there was honestly a couple that kind of it was like did it really resonate with me because there was a lot of diverse opinions in that room. So there wasn't going to be anything that really, I exactly agreed with. But it was like eye-opening to see the fact that someone who came in with like the most extremist opinions finally, thought it was okay to listen to the other side, thought it was okay to agree with this, or like the fact that they found common ground was just like, it was surprising to me. Like it makes you see the person, like the human within a person.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I think at the moment when they were sharing back, especially at the first event, we were kind of in shock. Like, we were still in shock the whole time. We had gotten so many interviews and we were expecting this to be like, a little chill thing. So I wrote down some of the responses in a very like unorganized format. But one of the biggest things is there were 2 people from like both extremists were at one table. Right. And when they stood up, we were expecting them to say, like, basically, we didn't agree on anything. And that's not what they said. They said that they found things they agreed with, and they found things that like they didn't completely understand about the other side's opinions. And that was the most shocking thing to us. That was at the youth event. So these were teenagers coming together. And I think a lot of the adult event, one of the biggest things is these were adults that we were seeing argue on Facebook. These were the adults leaving us comments. They're all the same people, really. And we saw those adults also come together. And that was one of the biggest things, because these are people who are constantly arguing about everything, not just this, on Facebook. And so when we saw them agree, it was like, oh my God, like we didn't even believe that we could do this, because again, this started out on Instagram. And like, I think what resonated the most is that people found humanity in each other. And like there were so many more people than we thought would.
Yeah, definitely. I think, that just kind of reflects how important your work is. It's just kind of that finding that shared like common ground and shared humanity between, both sides of this conflict that's incredibly like deeply rooted. Something else I was wondering about your events is I know you had 2 different ones. The first one was a youth one and the second one was an adult one. I'm wondering how the 2 differed in their conversation and how your goals for each one differed too.
So, the goals honestly were the same throughout the end. Like we were just trying to find get everyone to find common ground. The way we approached it though, for the teenagers conversation, we had a feedback form at the end, just like, so we can like better it for the adult one since it was more sensitive with adults. And honestly, the only like concern that we had, the only like thing that people wanted better was they wanted longer discussion times. They felt that the discussions like they went by pretty quickly. So that's what we kind of fixed for the adult conversation. But even though for the adults and like the teenagers one, we kind of fixed that part, it was really all the same concept, same stuff being taught, same material, just added on since it was, different in time frames. Additionally, one thing we added with the adults one was we didn't see adults and teenagers together. Teenagers were on one side of the room and adults were on the other side, but there was never a teenager and adult sitting at the same table unless they voluntarily wanted to. But I think that was just like kind of due to the different like perspectives and mentalities towards this. It was really important not to kind of mix that because then it just gets heated with like lack of understanding towards another.
Yeah. And do you see potentially having integrated adult and youth discussions in the future? Like maybe trying to incorporate that?
I definitely think we could, but also one of the other harms is that like if they got into a heated discussion, because these are people in the same community who will see each other again, it just has different power dynamics as the adult has more money and just more power over the youth. I think if these were people who we got a group who really did know each other and wouldn't have like doesn't have that much power over one another, I think we definitely could. And definitely older youth, because some of the people there were middle schoolers and freshmen in high school, and we didn't want them to be arguing with someone who could be their grandparent. We just didn't think that was fair because they're just not. And we also, part of our event was having people bond. So at the beginning, we asked things about things in TNEC as like the how it's like all the tensions in TNEC. So their conversations were different because they were centered around different things. And we also just didn't want to, it was more about the long-term effects. If they had a bad argument, we didn't want a teen to feel unsafe or not able to talk to this person again, even if they just see them in a passing by. So definitely maybe, but not a big group and not people who are like, don't really know each other.
Yeah. Um, I remember that in one of the interviews that I looked at between you two, you said that you're working to create a nonprofit right now called The Deeper Lens, in which you're trying to expand what you've done with these two events to a more national level. Can you just tell our viewers a little bit about your vision for that?
Yeah, so the Deeper Lens will basically be an organization that isn't centered really about Israel Palestine. Like, considering that's a sensitive topic at the moment, it's kind of focusing on that right now. But it'll basically be an organization that goes to different schools, different towns, districts, and kind of lets them have these conversations, not only about Israel Palestine, but about topics that town or like district is sensitive towards. Like, basically, it'll be an organization that allows people to have these conversations about different controversial topics that they may not like, agree on completely or have a lot of tension on, honestly. So yeah, we already been to a couple schools. We haven't officially sent out the applications for the organization or the website yet. It will come out soon by like the end of this month. It'll come out soon, but yeah, we've been to a couple of schools about it. We like talked to a couple of schools like neighboring us. We've had panels with them, discussions, and that's what the event really will do. It'll be youth led and for the youth. Like it'll be more so for schools, but for adults too. But it'll fully be youth. It'll be only like students in there, so we can get them community service hours and get them involved, regardless of whether they like politics or not.
Yeah. And obviously, this is great work that you're doing. I'm wondering, Rawda, I mean, you're a senior now, so you're going to be graduating soon. How do you plan to continue this once you go into college? And same with you, Liora. What happens once you guys go to college?
I think the plan is to create a good foundation of other teenagers who want to do this. And also the plan is that we're not going to go to every school. That's just not like real. Part of it is we'll be doing trainings like online for other people to lead conversations like this. And we've also been doing work. We did a workshop at a school last week that had nothing to do with Israel Palestine but it was for middle schoolers to learn how to have conversations like this, how to like just enter the world of where we are in such a world of polarization, how to enter that world, how to enter high school in a world like this, like teaching them not to have arguments over online because you don't see how the other person is moving. You don't see like the things they're not saying. And I think we're just doing trainings like that, and also doing trainings for people to lead events like this, and creating materials. So we had a packet, so like putting out formats for that. So sort of just how to lead a non-biased, how to take part, and just overall materials.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Oh, sorry. Oh. All right. So yeah, like Liora said, this would be like kind of passing it down to the next kind of thing, but I'm also still going to be like involved within it because like my major kind of has to do with this. Like it like relates, not politics, but it relates in a sense where it's like the studies and like I want to major in neuroscience and religion, a double major, and I want to study the intersection between both. And so I feel like that's really important with this organization. It kind of helps with it because in the beginning of this, everyone was saying that this whole thing that's happening is a religious issue. And I feel like that's what kind of made it like such a like controversial topic to talk about and such a sensitive topic, the fact that it's turned into a religious issue. So I feel like it's definitely something that relates to my major and something I'll definitely continue to do, but also to kind of pass it down to the next kind of like the next juniors and the next sophomores.
yeah. And throughout this entire process of you two working together to create these events, are there things that you've learned about each other like through these events?
Definitely. I think we met each other through like a speech and debate tournament. So we weren't really working together then. It was sort of just like a fun time. But I think part of what we learned is like our skills together, and we learned how to like communicate a lot better because we've been doing a lot of interviews and doing a lot of stressful things, and like when to just take over for someone if needed. Yeah, we've definitely become closer over it, talking about like the night before the events, doing like regular teenage things, like showing each other our outfits. I think like that was part of definitely like we couldn't just we didn't just bond over what our event, but just like bond over being like teenagers in general.
Mhm. And as my final question, if you had to give advice to somebody else who's very passionate about an issue and wants to do some activist work like you guys are doing, what advice would you give to them?
Honestly, the biggest advice I'd give is make connections. Like this whole event was really built off connections that I had from one person and that Liora had from another. So I think that like the biggest thing is make connections with those around you. Like even if the person can't directly help you, they definitely will know someone who can. And I think another with that is like after you make those connections, don't be scared to do it. Like you're gonna get a lot of hate. There's gonna be so much hate towards anything you do, like regardless of how many people agree with it. But I think you need to just keep going with it and have like a set motivating factor so that regardless of what people are saying, you know why you're doing it and why you need to do it. And I think even if like you don't have communities like this by your side, like the biggest thing for me is you be the community that you want by your side. So if you don't have communities that are doing this around you, you need to do it. Like whether you want to do politics or not, it's something that needs to be done by you. So yeah, the biggest thing, have connections. Connections are so important. Like regardless, they're so important.
My advice is like on a conversational level and a day-to-day level, don't try to win arguments. If it's not a speech and debate tournament, you're not there to beat them. You're there to understand their point of view. I used to be someone like that, but to a point where people, when I was in middle school, people wouldn't even want to argue with me because they know like I would win. I would try to make them like feel bad for their answers. But I've learned not to do that anymore. So I think that's like on an interpersonal level. And I think also take every opportunity. I'm someone who my parents say I have way too many things I'm connected to, but I've become part of it. I have all these connections from it. So take these opportunities, follow social media accounts that are not just like news accounts, but follow like organizational accounts, like established organizations, because a lot of times they have youth opportunities, and try to find youth organizations for all of it. Because many of the times you could just apply and you will get in if you're passionate enough about it. So take every opportunity and try not to win every argument.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. I just wanted to say, thank you again for coming on my show. Thank you again for all the work you're doing. I think it's really amazing and very necessary that you're having these conversations, especially with a conflict that's so deeply rooted and people feel very passionate about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To all of our viewers, I hope you'll join us for our next episode. I'm Daniel Adibi, and I'll see you soon.